We have made it happen. He has come on, and I've been so much looking forward to this conversation. Rob Reichley is with me. He, of course, is SVP, executive producer at Raycom Sports, and he's going to tell his story. We're going to have a really deep conversation learning about his life, what he's overcome, stories embedded as well on the Honest Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and Fox Sports Radio. Rob, this is going to be a lot of fun. I know I've had a ton of your colleagues on, and to get a chance to have you on as well, this is going to be really special.
Well, thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. I know it's been a while. We seems like we've been talking for like 4 or 5 years about doing this, and thank you for hitting me back just to see if I can. I know this will be a short story. It might be 5 to 10 minutes long, so we'll milk as much out of this as we can.
When you say short story, that's another way of you being a humble, because what I see over and over the course of your career is you being there for others and you supporting others. And as we start up this conversation, Rob, why have you found it so important to show up for others?
I would have to say, I mean, I think people do this. I go back to just my family, my mom and dad, and that's how they were. And I just kind of, you're around them all the time and you see what they do. And I think my dad, especially in his job, helped out a lot of people. I just know not from what he says, but what still he's passed for about 4 years now. And just the other people that have come up to me before he passed and after, just how much he meant to them. So I feel like it's a way to kind of continue on kind of what my mom and dad did. So it's it's human nature, and it should be something that we all should be doing. It's not that hard to help out other people, and it's disappointing when you actually meet and work with some people that aren't like that. But the world is the way it is, and it's not a fairy tale world. But no, I think it always goes back to my family.
It goes to show you that the family that you have, the nucleus biologically, it also extends to your work. You have one big family there. That's what people feel when they're around you. Rob Reichley is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. How often, Rob, do you hear the uplifting messages in the words from your parents in your mind to this day, guiding you and leading you and helping you in moments when you really could and really need to rely on their strength?
Yeah, there are moments, Brian, that I have, in personal in my life with my wife and my dog, Penny Lane. I got to get her in there because she's everything to us. But anyway, but no, it's there's personal moments, and then there's professional moments that they're always going to be what I would call flashbacks for me to my mom and dad and what they did for us. And even my sister, I have a sister who lives in Seattle, and I got a brother in Massachusetts and a brother in New York City. So between the four of us, and then obviously my wife and our nieces and nephews, there's always flashbacks that I get about from what they said. I mean, my dad was and my mom were big readers. So they had and big music people. So that's one thing that I have grown. I am a music lover, and I get that from my mom and dad, especially. But also reading. I don't read as much as they do. I wish I could. I feel like some of it's just because of the job. I don't have the time. I try to, on airplanes now, I try to put away the work and get the book out. I flew to New York Monday and back yesterday, and I did. I kind of work until we get in the air and then try to take out the book. But anyway, it's but my dad was a huge history reader, and I was a history major in college, worked right into my broadcasting career. I took no broadcasting, went to a very small school in Pennsylvania, but I was a history major. So I really appreciate history, but my dad did too. So it's those, again, kind of the flashbacks that we have. And it's interesting, after my dad had passed, I don't know why, but he had given me one of his books on Winston Churchill.
Wow.
And it's one of those things where I went, saw him, and I put it to the side. And And I didn't pick it up, and he passed, and I was 2 months later, and I picked it up, and there was a note in there that he had written me. And I had no idea. I mean, it's a neglectful son. I'm embarrassed to even say it, that I didn't like take it and at least open up the book. And it was just this nice note, from him about me, and, kind of just, just things about my life and things. It was really nice.
Your dad was always there to show up for you, and what a testament to him, and for you to read that note. I can't even imagine internally what that felt like for you. And then when you think about your mom and what she meant to you, and having her around into her 90s, how do you think even into her 90s she was able to convey to you, whether it was verbally or whether it was with her actions, how proud she is of you?
I think it goes back a little bit what you were saying, Brian, about family. She was all about the family all the time. And I think other people, when you're small and you grow up, you don't appreciate it. You like to think you appreciate your parents as much as you should have at that time, but you definitely, as you grow older, and even though my wife and I didn't have kids, you understand everything that they did for you. And it's like, wow. And you appreciate it a little bit more as you get older and understand kind of, what they did for you. So it's she just was always appreciative. One reason I love having BC and the ACC, among a lot of other things, the fact that it gave me some free trips home to Providence, Rhode Island. My wife, who is she is a hearty and passionate ACC NC State fan. So she didn't like how they progressed into BC and Syracuse outside the footprint here. Because she wants it back to where it was when South Carolina was back in the 60s and stuff. But I loved when BC joined, but it gave me a chance to go home and obviously see, especially my mom and my dad and my brother. But so, I mean, it was good. But she was always about family. And you know what? She knew all her kids had jobs and we all had to work. And you miss out on things, there's no doubt, and it's unfortunate. You look back, and I don't have any big, capital R regrets, just some small R regrets, probably, of missing things through the years. But she always, and my dad did, both understood that, you got your job to do, you go do your job. And when you come up and see us, you come up and see us. So we did. So again, I try to schedule myself on as many BC games as possible for basketball. But my mom's interesting only because, short story is that she was very, very, very good and smart until she passed. But she had a lot of physical, just, the pains of a 93-year-old woman. Mm-hmm. But she was someone who, you would ask her, like, how are you feeling? She said, I'm fine. And you say, so on, 1 to 10, 10 being you're really in a lot of pain, what are you at? She said, I'm about a 9. And I'm saying, okay, if you're a 9, that's not fine. Fine is like if you're a 3 or 4 or 5. She goes, no, I'm fine. But mom, your pain is at a 9. That's like excruciating pain for me if I'm at a 9. But she goes, no, I'm just fine. I'm just fine. So she was a tough lady for sure. She really
Why
was.
do you think that she didn't want you to know the pain she was in, that she wanted you to not worry about her?
Oh, she never did. She never did. She would be the one that she'd see some storm rolling through the South, and she knows her geography, but it could be in Texas, and she'd be calling my wife or I and say, are you guys okay? I mean, I saw there was some storms rolling through. It's like, Mom, no, it's out in Texas. It's not going to come this way at all. I mean, a funny story about her was my brother was getting some windows in his house, and he got a call from her, and he said, Mom, what's up? She goes, well, I just want to let you know I'm in an ambulance going to the hospital, but I want to make sure you're getting your windows in because I know it's raining outside.
Oh my gosh.
And my brother's like, well, you're doing what? Yeah, I'm in an ambulance. No concern, no problem. I just fell. I need to go. And they just call and they're concerned. It's like, Mom, my windows are fine. It's okay. It's raining, but it'll be okay. But that's kind of how she was.
It seems the last thing that she wanted you to know was how she was. She wanted you to know that you came first. Those that she loved came first before anything that she was about. And I feel like that trickles in, Rob, to the way in which you look at your work. When the joy, the excitement, the fun you have with everything you do with Raycom Sports, the traveling, the big events, and as we said earlier, that family like environment that you've created. How do you find yourself sort of taking on the way in which your mom acts, in a way, by the way in which you lead your constituents and your coworkers at Raycom, where it's not about you, it's about them?
Yeah.
And how does that come out in ways in which eerily or similar to the way in which maybe your mom was, and you're picking that up over the years?
Right. Yeah, Brian, I've been very fortunate in it's now almost 40 years in the business that I have been very lucky to be in a close group of what I would consider family at every place. When I worked at Cablevision in Connecticut, I only worked there for about a year and a half, but I met my wife there. Then I went to Cincinnati and worked at two stations there, and the two guys, John Popovich and Denny Jansen, who I worked with at the CBS station there, are just two of my all-time, great mentors to me. And then I moved over to Channel 5, the NBC station there, and the friends I still have, George Vogel and Ron Millenor, Tom Brenneman, Billy Hemmer, some other guys, Marty Brenneman, the people that I met, Steve Fiziak, um, all just awesome people that were there just to help and to be a family. And then the one thing I realized when I moved down here, Brian, and I moved down here because it was my wife's chance to move, actually. And she came down. This is her home territory. This is one of the stations she grew up watching. And she ultimately came down here to be their news director. So her chance to move, I was feeling really good about what was going on in Cincinnati. I was working with the Reds and the Bengals. I was at Channel 5, which I would consider at the time the dominant sports station because we own the rights to the Reds. And then we moved down here. So I freelanced a little bit. And then I moved on. Jimmy Rayburn, who is the guy that hired me 30 years ago, hired me at Jefferson Pilot. And the one thing I realized very quickly, Brian, about the Jefferson Pilot Raycom companies was family. And it wasn't just the family like of the 40 or 50 people that have worked for us over the years. It was all the freelancers that we and these are hundreds of people over the course of time of the time that I've been here, the hundreds of freelancers that we have. And I noticed that was the true thing. That was the family. These are guys that have gone on. Unfortunate for us, and good for them, they've gone on. These are guys that have gone on and are considered some of the best cameramen, audio specialists, font operators, announcers, and everything else. I mean, I look at the announcers, like Bob Rathbun, like Mike Patrick, like Dan Bonner, like Mike Cheminsky, like Tim Brando, like Tim Brandt. I mean, it's an all-star group of guys that have come through the Jefferson Pilot Raycom family because it was always about quality with the guys. When Jimmy was here since he came in '86, and he's still here as one of our senior advisors, as our senior advisor. And he hired people that were good, just plain old good. And our crewing department hired a group of people, especially in the Carolinas, because I don't know if you know C.D. Chesley, Councilman Tatali Chesley. Short story is he came down from Philadelphia. He basically televised the 1958 NCAA Final Four, which Carolina, perfect season. They beat Wilt Chamberlain. Kansas in the finals, 2 triple overtime games. They beat Michigan State, and then they beat Kansas for their first championship ever with Frank McGuire. Lenny Rosenbluth was the MVP. So he put that on, and then the next year he started basically the ACC basketball network. It was the game of the week, so they had 8 or 9 games that year, and he built that up through 1981 is when he lost the contract to Metro Sports out of the Washington D.C. area, and then in '82, that's when JP and Raycom brought together and have owned the rights since '82, '83.
When you were just getting started with them, what did they see in you, the good that they saw in you before you became what you are today?
It's funny. So again, my wife got here, and basically the management here at BTV arranged for me to go and talk to some people. Like Jimmy Rayburn was one. He was the EP here. Peter Rolfe, who was an EP at Raycom. A guy named Dan Devine, who's at Group 5 Sales, and Alicia Killigan over at Creative Sports, which ultimately became Ballantyne and ESPN down here, down in Ballantyne. And they were just doing some cursory, some interviews with me. I mean, they didn't have any jobs. I mean, I came back from the meetings. I told my wife, Shannon, I said, I don't know. I mean, they're all being very nice to me, but nobody has a job, they're just doing it out of as a favor, that's just the way it is. So basically I freelanced for about 6 months, and then Steve Craddock moved he was the EP here at Jefferson Pilot, and he became the EP down at Fox Sports South in Atlanta. And then he ultimately came back up to be EP of Speed Channel. So he left in August. So Jimmy was really his football was just going to start. So Jimmy was like, oh, I wonder who we can hire. And he called me back. So I tell him, because when I talked to Jimmy initially, like 6 months later, he barely gave me the time of day. He was here shuffling papers and moving stuff around his desk. And again, I told my wife when I go home, I said, this guy from Jefferson Pilot's not going to hire me. He barely even talked to me. But 6 months later, he hired me. I don't know, Brian. I mean, I think, one, I've had pretty good experience in Cincinnati. I produced the Johnny Bench show and the Pete Rose show for 6 years. We did a lot of sports programming, and he hired me to do the pregame ACC football show. And Marty Brennan was the guy who actually called Jimmy and vouched for me and everything.
Oh.
So I think that was a lot of it, because, a guy like Marty calls, and Jimmy obviously had used Marty on our SEC basketball package. So he knew Marty and respected him. So I think that helped out a lot. And, it's sometimes it is word of mouth and get lucky, Brian. I've been so fortunate on timing. And you know how important timing is sometimes. And it was when I moved from Connecticut to Cincinnati, and then when I moved internally in Cincinnati, and then even moving down here. I mean, Steve Craddock doesn't go down to Fox Sports South. Who knows? Maybe things work out the same as it did, but that just seemed to work in my favor. And it just everything since then, Jimmy just was great to me, and here I am today.
For you being, and Rob Reichley is with me, SVP executive producer, Raycom Sports. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel. The amount of you discussing your history and you being a history major in college, how often in you're a reader when you can, and I know you've talked about this, your way of unplugging and learning, and just see from you, Rob, this perpetual desire to learn. And what a great place to do that than studying up on history. How often do you allow yourself to study your own history and really analyze your different moves as ways to learn yourself about what you did?
I'll say, Brian, I haven't really thought about it that much. Again, I think that, my wife, Shannon's been in TV, as I said, since we met. And that's been a definite common bond for us. We've kind of gone through the valleys and the mountains, and because as you know, it's she was in the news business and I was in sports, and it's just we have a game tonight at 7 o'clock. Well, when people are going home to enjoy just hanging out at their house, that's when everyone who works in sports, that's when they go to work, you know. It's when people are at their leisure, basically on nights and weekends. So I but that's just what you do. I don't, again, there's no regrets that like, oh, I missed doing this or that because I was at a game. I mean, I love going to games. I mean, I love it. I mean, I like the pro sports. We do the Panthers preseason games. We've done them since the beginning. I love doing that. I live here. I'm a Panther fan, but I do love college sports. And I just have always grown up. My dad worked at a college basically all of his life. So I learned to appreciate college sports from, again, going back to my mom and dad. Like, we went to sporting events, my younger brother and I, and my mom and dad, we went to football games every Saturday afternoon. We would go to hockey and lacrosse and soccer and basketball games and swimming during thing, because he loves sports. My younger brother and I love sports. I think my mom liked it. She showed up, and no, she does. She liked going to sports too. I mean, and fortunately, I married someone who loves sports too. I mean, again, very passionate Wolfpack fan, Panther fan. I think that's part of it as well. That I kind of, going back to my mom and dad, I learned a lot about just sports and college sports. I love going to campuses. I've been doing ACC basketball. This will be my 30th year doing that. I did 15 years of SEC football, and I grew up in New England, which again is it's a pro area.
Sure.
I mean, let's face it, that most of the colleges in that area are small. Like BC's obviously the biggest one, but then you always got the University of New Hampshire, Vermont, University of Rhode Island, PC, obviously basketball wise is good. But as far as football, BC is really the only school at that time that was kind of major league. And one thing I learned in 1994 when I did the SEC is there's totally different college football around here. And I tell you, that's another part of the family. I was learning. I was trying to learn as much as I can about SEC football. Now, things just growing up, the names and everything like that, but you don't really do it. And when you get down there, that's when you figure out what it means to that fan base. And going to Tennessee and going to Oxford and Starkville and Gainesville and going to Baton Rouge and Auburn and Alabama. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And I noticed we were partnering with them as we were their noon game, basically, our 11:30 game. So, and it was always Friday night. They would take you out along with the bowl guys that were there for a dinner wherever. And again, it kind of goes back to family, Brian. It was like you were part of the family, even though it was this new kid from Rhode Island that probably didn't know as much as he should about it at the time. Was part of this family along with your announcers and your director and the rest of the crew. And man, I had so much fun doing that for 15 years, and then moving back over to the ACC for another 10, also another good time. And again, part of that's, working with Tim Brando and Bob Kessling, Dave Neal, Bob Carpenter, Tim Brandt, Tom Wormy, and Dave Archer and Dave Rowe. I mean, I couldn't have been any better. So much fun.
When you recall those days with the SEC and you going to those college towns, you mentioned Oxford. My sister and my dad went to Ole Miss. I love how important it is, the SEC, to you. And like you said, there's nothing like it. The pageantry, the camaraderie, the energy, the fans' excitement about those teams. But here you are, that younger sponge form of yourself, and you're at these dinners, before games. How much are you listening in those dinner conversations? And then when did you choose to speak up as you're taking all of these events in these big dinners before games?
Yeah, I listened a lot my first year, Brian. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, I just sat there and kind of ate my food and just, listened to everyone like Langston Rogers, who's a longtime SID at Ole Miss, Bud Ford at Florida, Stevie Mack, I'm sorry, at Tennessee, Stevie Mack down at Florida, Kirk Sampson down at Auburn. So, yeah, I listened a lot early on. I mean, I really made a commitment, as anyone should, to learn more and more about the individual schools and reading about traditions and walking the campus and kind of checking out the tailgating and getting the atmosphere around. That was important for me. And it's same with the ACC and going to Clemson and going to Florida State and going to Carolina and State and Wake and Duke and Virginia Tech and Virginia. I mean, that was always important for me. And I did that a lot in basketball too, being able to go to Duke and walk around Cameron right before, the broadcast is, just to kind of get the Cameron crazies and everything and kind of get the atmosphere down. Cause remember, you're sitting in this, 53-foot, tractor trailer, basically, that's been, souped up with $6 million worth of equipment. And, you're not in the arena. So it's different. But no, with the SEC, definitely, and even with the ACC, I listened a lot at the beginning, but obviously after 30 years, I feel a little bit more comfortable.
You've listened a lot. You've read a lot. Your dad, if I'm not mistaken, was a sports writer. And when you go back and even at the time when you would read his work, what insights would you gain from your father from his work in his writings that you didn't get in any other avenue of your interactions with him, that you learned a new side of him in his work that you didn't
Yeah.
see anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, my dad he was a sports writer for the York Dispatch in York, Pennsylvania, which is where he and my mom were born there, as was myself and my older brother and sister. My other brother was born in Indiana. So, I just learned from both my parents about work ethic. I think that was probably the biggest thing that I got from both of them. Just that they always seemed to be, there always was something that they had to be doing for work, especially with my dad. My mom was stay at home until two of my older brother and sister went out, and then she worked until till my mom and dad both retired. But she kept us going. We were very active kids. As you know, my sister was in dance and my brother was a musician, and my younger brother and I were so-called athletes. So there were a lot of things that had to be done. So there was a lot, as you know, a lot of ferrying around and everything. But no, I think the work ethic was at most everything. Again, my dad always delivered a message of, being fair to people. And I think that's lost sometimes. I think that those were two of the messages that he had as much as anything.
That's beautifully said. My final question for you, Rob Reichley, is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley, and in your extended family, you've got kids in your extended family, and it's fun to see, on social media, being with them and the joy that I see in your face, when you're with them, and oftentimes you'll say, so and so nieces and nephews, they're going to take over the world.
Mm.
What does them taking over the world look like to you?
Um, Listen, I want them to grow up and just you know, do what they can to enjoy themselves, make a difference. And I think making a difference can be interpreted a lot of different ways. but I think the biggest thing is I always, all of them now are out of college. And that some of them are just beginning their careers, some are, 10 years into their career, I guess. So I have been so fortunate to be able to enjoy my work. My wife, again, being in news it can be challenging at times, but I think she would say over her lifetime she's enjoyed her work. And let's face it, if you can go through life and enjoy what you do every day, again, challenges, sometimes you're going to come home and you're going to beat your head up against the wall sometimes. That's okay. But overall, if you can enjoy your work, and be good to others, and to realize some happiness, and some good, I think that's as much taking over the world for me. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be the president of the United States. That would be nice. It'd be nice if one of them becomes that. I believe in them, and I would certainly campaign for them. So, but no, I just think, again, I think part of it's enjoying it, and enjoying not only your work, but also the people you work with, your wife or husband, kids, and everything else.
Rob, for the purposes of this conversation, what I wanted to get out is all the elements of you in which why people would campaign for you as a good person, the authenticity coming out, a hard worker who, as you said, enjoys what he does. And it's so interesting to see how you talked about your mom and her selflessness, and then you make this move following your wife, not knowing what's in front of you. And that loyalty and that trust in what is coming up and being there for your wife ultimately opens the door, and beautiful things happen for you. And as a man of the arts, I know we didn't get into this, but I know you oftentimes visit the symphony and all that you do there in terms of just taking that in, but having the chance to take in your words and really understand the mentality on a deep level of who you are, man. This has been special, Rob. I really appreciate you doing this.
Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. And you're talking about the loyalty. There's no doubt the loyalty between my wife and I. We've been married 37 years now, so it's again, we've had to have each other's back for a long time, because it is sometimes you do struggle, and we got married about at a young age of 25. But it's been a great ride for sure, and expecting a lot more.
A great ride from that, but also in terms of your career, and countless number of people would say the same thing about you, and the way in which you treat them, and that team aspect in the household, but also in the production truck and everything you do from a professional standpoint. Rob Reichley, SVP, executive producer, Raycom Sports. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel. Thanks so much. This was absolutely fantastic to hear your input and your point of view.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed, like I told you before, I've enjoyed listening to some of your other guests that I've known, and some of them I haven't. So I appreciate you letting me talk for a little bit more. It did last more than 5 or 10 minutes, so I'm
Yes,
glad that I even got through that. So that's good.
Yeah, it was interesting. The one thing I heard from you when we first were chatting was, oh, I don't think I have an interesting story. You have a very interesting story, but what you do have is a significant humble gene. And even though we talked longer, that doesn't mean you're not humble. It just shows you even more why you are humble. So thanks again,
Well,
Rob.
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it, Brian. Appreciate it.